President-elect Trump's Treasury pick Scott Bessent is going to be sitting before the Senate Finance Committee this morning to begin his confirmation process. Joining us right now is Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas. He's a member of that Finance Committee, and he's going to be asking a number of questions. What's at the top of your list, sir?
Well, I think taxes, tariffs, and trade, I think, are the three things that sort of general categories. But there's so much to talk about. As you know, we've been coming off of a 40-year high inflation rate. My hope is that the federal government will quit overstimulating the economy by pouring a bunch of additional gasoline on the fire through some of the efficiency efforts, some of the budget resolution and reconciliation process that we're going to be going through. But those are the top of mind.
Among the proposed cabinet members, I imagine this sails through. How quickly do you think this can happen?
I think it's going to be pretty quick. I don't see a lot of controversy. There's certainly no question about qualifications and background. There will be some foot dragging, as there usually is, in denying the president and his cabinet on a timely basis. But we're determined to do everything we can to grind through the schedule to make that difficult so the president can get his team on board as soon as possible. I think that's what we owe him and the American people who elected him, that we can get his team on board as quickly as possible.
What do you want to hear from Bessent as it relates to tariffs? There's been a lot of conflicting reporting. Obviously, the president's talked, quite openly about implementing big tariffs. There have been some reports recently that have suggested that perhaps Bessent and some of the folks around him are looking at ways to gradually put tariffs on so that there's an opportunity to negotiate and whatnot. How much do you plan to dig into that, and how much can you hold somebody like that to their word insofar as they may have one idea and the president may have another?
Well, the president's going to be the one to make the decision, obviously, and his cabinet will advise him. And I'm sure he'll be hearing from members of Congress, including people like me. Tariffs can be very useful in a surgical sort of operation. And certainly President Trump is to be commended for raising the flag on some of the unfair trade practices that we've seen around the world. A lot of us have come to believe that free and fair trade is just sort of a given, but unfortunately a lot of our trading partners don't play by the rules, most notably China. And so particularly I think we'll see some more strategic use of those tariffs. But I expect this to be a subject of a lot of conversation because, of course, they can raise costs on consumers and risk some inflationary pressure. So a lot of discussion about that, but the president will be the one ultimately to negotiate the deal.
Senator, how concerned are you about any of the comments that Bessent made earlier during the campaign about this idea of trying to install a shadow Fed chair, if you will, to effectively neuter the effectiveness of Jay Powell in this role without necessarily removing him?
Yeah, I just don't know how that would happen. The Fed's got the exclusive right to deal with monetary policy. We've pretty much ignored the fiscal policy, which is the responsibility of Congress, and I expect us to attend to that shortly. But I wouldn't think a whole lot of that. I mean, there's going to be people with different opinions, as there always are, and I think we should listen to all of those, but ultimately it's going to be the Fed's responsibility, and I think the Fed should remain.
No, Senator, the reason I'm asking is I'm asking what do you think about Scott Bessent in the context that he was the one who made those comments and therefore it's raised the specter and, again, questions about the independence of the Fed. Obviously, and I interviewed Jay Powell about this a couple months ago, the chair of the Fed and the head of the Treasury Department typically have a breakfast or lunch at least once a month, if not every week. They have to not only get along, they have to work almost hand in glove together to some degree. And so it's an interesting dynamic with which you have the person who you're going to be talking to today having made these comments earlier.
Right. Well, people make comments for all sorts of reasons, and then when they're out of office and then when they get in office and have that responsibility, I think it tends to temper their conduct when they realize the gravity and the impact of their decisions. So I don't expect any sort of radical change. I do expect the conversation to occur and the debate on the independence of the Fed, which we've always had and will always have.
Senator, unrelated question, but it's in the mix in terms of business and what's happening over the next, frankly, a little over 72 hours between the inauguration and Sunday, which is the day that TikTok is supposed to be shuttered, if you will, by law. A law I believe that you voted in favor of. The company's been declared a national security threat. There's reporting this morning from the New York Times that the CEO of TikTok has been invited to sit on the dais at the inauguration on Monday. So the CEO of a company that has been declared as, and a law has been put in place because it's a national security threat, is now going to be sitting on the dais behind the president at the inauguration. What is going on here?
Well, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people on the dais or at the platform where the president's being sworn in that aren't necessarily big Trump supporters. But they
forget about Trump supporters. You voted because you believe that this company is a national security threat, I believe. And that's the person who's running that company, the national security threat company, is being invited by the president of the United States to sit there. So we're all trying to understand what's happening. Is there a negotiation happening, something else? And I'm curious, as somebody who voted effectively against having this company operate here because you thought it was a danger to Americans, what you think about this.
Well, I'm agnostic on who owns TikTok, except for the fact that I do think ownership by the Chinese Communist Party, in effect, the government of China, is a national security threat. It's a spy on your phone, basically. But I expect there to be some negotiations. We passed the law. It was signed into law. The Supreme Court is going to review it. President Trump wants some time to allow further negotiations to occur, but I would expect that would result not in the status quo, but in divestment of TikTok, of ownership by a Chinese company, ByteDance, which will address the basic concern.
But the law that was put in place by Congress, signed into law by the Biden administration, can't be undone by executive order, right?
No, it cannot.